Chris, we're live.
We are. Thank you. This is Wrestlenomics Radio. It is November 5th, 2017. I am Christopher Mukigana Harrington, joined by my North, my Northeast, by Brandon Howard Thurston for Knowledge. Howard. How are you today, Brandon?
I'm great, Mookie. I'm still learning how to use Google Hangouts. So you might have been in a small box or perhaps not even visible when you just said what you said, but I'm here and I'm ready to talk about whether or not WWE has gotten less popular this year.
Yes. So we've actually been talking now for 2.5 hours. We did an hour and some change on WWE and New Japan and some other stuff. We did an hour on the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame ballot. And now we're getting into the good stuff, which is, of course, what we like to see. I think my camera just went out on us here.
Yeah, we can't see you, but we can hear you. I don't know what's going on.
That's all that matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we get into the good stuff, which is the spreadsheets that you've been collecting here. Since my camera's not working right, we can at least.
So we'll just start sharing the screen now then.
Yes.
So I'm going to share a Excel spreadsheet that I put together based on Google Trends, which anyone can look at publicly by just going to trends.google.com, and you can type in various search words and you can get all sorts of data. And you can splice them out by all sorts of regions and spans of time. So should I explain what I did here?
Yeah. So let's bring it back, because obviously you have numbers now. What do these numbers mean? And can you give us an example of what happened that you're looking at? So what is it that you're searching for? What term are you searching for? Just WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment?
You can show exactly what I did here. The term that I'm searching for is WWE. And what I would call it is not just looking at data for when people searched for WWE, that exact string, but I'm looking at data for what I would call an entire bucket, so it's WWE things and maybe WWE related things, which I think you get a hint of if you scroll down here and you look at related terms, if it will load. So you can see over here on the right, various other terms that I think are being included in this bucket.
So you have Raw, you have SmackDown, you have WrestleMania, and you have Page.
Right.
And then go back up for a second just so we can see what those top 5 countries are. Oh my. Oh, these are great. These are great. So the 5 countries with the most interest in WWE are Pakistan.
Per capita. The most interest per capita.
Nepal, Zambia.
Are you enjoying this? India.
I love the fact that Zambia makes the list.
Mm-hmm. Where's Zambia?
I can't wait for Zambia's in lower southern part of Africa.
There it is, right there.
A little bit above, you got South Africa, and then you have, a couple of the bordering ones like Zimbabwe and whatnot, and then above that is Zambia. I had to teach it from Zambia once.
I've clicked away like a fool. Okay, I forgot I have my camera here with my screen. All right,
I know, right? It's a big learning for all of us, but it's fun. Yes. Do you have our channel open twice in your history up there?
No, this is just something this is the window I'm using to start this broadcast. And this is the one I'm monitoring with.
Wow. So. Boxes and boxes. All right. So going back, so you're searching for just the WWE term, you're looking at it by different countries over time. And you're saying how, if I look at this line, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. Of course it goes up every year, kind of between that January through April period that we often see that happen.
Like the peak this year, as you can see, is right here for the week of WrestleMania. And the chart that we're looking at by default here is the past 12 months. And Google will let us go all the way back to 2004. So if we're looking at worldwide, we're looking at 2004 to present, and here it is, and they splice it out month by month. Google Trends go even if we just look at the past 4 hours, we could get like a minute by minute idea of the activity. So,
wow,
yeah,
that is very specific. So I guess that would be very interesting to watch during a pay-per-view to look up. If we were watching New Japan and we looked up, say, Chris Jericho.
Yeah,
I'd be curious over the last 24 hours here if Chris Jericho would
go probably be biases right before and right after, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be really curious. Mm-hmm. Are you going to try that right now for me?
No, you can look at it. See, the weird thing about Google Trends, and probably nobody's going to care about this, but me and you. But the weird thing about Google Trends is right now I can look at it minute by minute, but I can't choose a specific point in time in the past. Like I can't go back
Sure.
to Survivor Series hasn't happened yet, but I can't go back to like, I don't know, No Mercy, the day of No Mercy. If I pick that out, it would give me a really not good piece of
It just
data.
gives you a single day's data point.
Here's it one day, like it won't even show me. Okay.
Can you show me how Chris Jericho's done over the past week?
Yeah, I can.
I'd love to see that.
So you're gonna want to look at more than just the past week because you want to look at it in some context, right? So if I just looked at the past week,
Well, even over the past week, I think he would have gone up.
And one thing we should note too is this. No, there you go. How about that?
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, a week ago, Jericho was feuding on Twitter with Omega, and almost
this is in my 7 a.m. This is my local time, so this is Eastern time. This would be just about after the show ended, I think. Roughly.
So I would love to.
We're referring to the big angle between Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho.
Spoilers if you haven't watched New Japan yet. Sorry about that, but hey, it's the top story right now, and the event already aired live. So
we should mention too, if you're not familiar with Google Trends, this is the x-axis, right? Yeah. This is a relative value. So
it's also the y-axis, but yeah.
Well, I just said the x-axis, and you said yes, but so this is from 0 to 100, and it's a relative value. We can put other terms on this chart and compare it to this, but when we're just looking at this alone, it's basically saying, okay, here's the highest point it ever was within this time period, and then we're going to hold every other point to this high standard.
100 index being the highest it's going to go. Yep. And then no one's ever at a 0 index, because as long as you have some traffic, you're somewhere about, you're not.
Unless your interest just somehow gets absolutely obliterated, it's really hard to go down to a 0.
And that's usually more of a fact that like you're searching for a term that really Google Trends hasn't like capitalized on. So I'm sure Wrestlenomics does not show up on. Well, how does Wrestlenomics do? Let's find out. Are we more popular than Chris Jericho on a worldwide basis? No, we are not.
We are flatlining. That's a shame.
Can we take Jericho out?
Off the chart here. See here in the past, there's some people searching for Wrestlenomics, isn't that?
But you can see like how spotty it is.
Right, like yeah.
It basically tells you that we max out at the single data point of whatever it is that it's evaluating us on, not as a there's no discrete changes in interest here for the most part. Yeah. So something else is really happening with some of this. And I'm not sure. Talked about this before, where it's a problem where some of these WWE wrestlers you look at, you'll see spikes in their performance well before they were ever signed by WWE, and it's clear they're not referring to Paige the wrestler back in 2008.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity at times. You can search. So what we're looking at here, we should know, is like this is a search term. So what Wrestlenomics is, we're not famous enough for that, but we can search for any single string. I guess I'll call this a string, right? It's just a search string. It's not a bucket that Google's aware of, and I'm not sure what the criteria is for them to create a bucket. It seems like maybe a Wikipedia page, but there are exceptions to that. But
and then it seems to figure out who they are. So like when we looked at Chris Jericho, it said American Canadian professional wrestler. So it understood that it wasn't just a generic thing. And then you can even see some of the sub terms again, like you said, from Wikipedia that are probably coming about. What does Dave Meltzer get you?
No, he's in there.
American journalist. There we go. Interesting.
I don't know. Is he up? He does.
Sorry, Wade.
All right. But
so this is not at all what we intended to discuss. When we said let's do a live broadcast. There's a
lot of fun to be had here.
Yeah, this might be the part of this that we leave for the YouTube but take out of the podcast. But this is entertaining for us because it's interesting, but we're not really commenting on what the numbers are for the people that are only listening at home, is my point.
But I think you can look at, this is something I look at quite a bit, and I think it's pretty consistent, where you can see just how far above everybody else John Cena is. And then there's Roman Reigns. And then there's like people like, who else comes the next closest are people like Seth Rollins and maybe AJ Styles. And of course, you should probably consider Brock Lesnar in there, but I think Brock Lesnar not being on TV as regularly keeps him a little bit lower. There's exceptions, obviously.
So Brock is the purple line. So we see Brock kind of surpassing Roman periodically, probably when he's doing like a big SummerSlam angle or something.
Yeah. Like looks like Survivor Series, the Goldberg match. This is WrestleMania for everybody.
Can you replace AJ with or I don't know if you can add or replace.
Yeah, there's up to 5. We can put
Braun
5 in
Strowman.
here at a time. Oh yeah. You can look at it. So they show you over here on the left averages over this entire time period that you've chosen. So this is the average for everybody. And Braun Strowman is at a 3 on average in the last 12 months, and Seth Rollins at a 5, Lesnar at an 18, Roman Reigns at a 20, John Cena at a 35.
And let's finalize this by saying, instead of looking worldwide, let's make this just of the United States. So this is now us kind of zooming in to say perhaps there's different trends where John Cena might remain more popular in other parts of the world where he's kind of become the face of it. And I think the first thing that pops out here is Brock Lesnar's popularity skyrockets compared to what it is worldwide.
It gets much closer to Roman Reigns.
Yeah. Well, and in as of SummerSlam 2017, it's even surpasses John Cena, right?
Let's look closer. Yeah, it just edges him out. This is.
I guess it's not SummerSlam. It's the July end pay-per-view period. But yeah,
is this when he wrestled Joe? Maybe. This is probably when he wrestled Samoa Joe.
So we definitely see that. Brock Lesnar has a lot more marquee name value in the United States than say maybe worldwide. Roman Reigns appears to be the significant number 2 behind John Cena, and John Cena, despite not being on television.
Yeah, it was at the end of July, that pay-per-view match. Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, you can see John Cena spikes in the April, and that's clearly the WrestleMania weekend with the addition of that Nikki Bella proposal. Yep. And it goes back to a talking point we had at the time, which was as meaningless as that Miz Maurice versus Nikki Bella John Cena match was. It had a good build, but was not a meaningful match per se. The engagement garnered a lot of social media attention, and that's the sort of thing that is captured very strongly by Google Trends.
Right. We can point out too that we're currently looking at a web search. So this is people searching on Google for these people or things related to these people. But we can also look at image search, news search, Google Shopping. I've done an article based on looking at Google Shopping to make a guess at who's selling merchandise. And we can look at YouTube search as well. Generally, though, I'm looking at Google web search when I'm tweeting about things from Google Trends and whatnot.
So let's get into our numbers that you've been collecting here.
Yes. So what I did was
someday we'll just do a live Mookie and Brandon just putts around on Google live for everybody podcast, which is almost what this is turning into. But we'll actually go back to the numbers you collected, because we did have a whole theory we started with here.
So what I did was if you click on this share button, you can pull a CSV, which is an Excel file, so you can get the data that's being referred to here. So I pulled that stuff for WWE, and
what does CSV stand for?
Comma separated values or something like that.
That is correct. That is correct. Well
done. So I pulled all the data, and I think this is the data tab. So I pulled it for every month for every year from 2004 to the present. So and I pulled it by various regions, by worldwide in its entirety, and then I just pulled it for the U.S., for the U.K., for Canada, for India, for Germany, and for Australia. And what do you say? Those are the 6 top markets for WWE.
From a dollar basis, U.S. is by far the biggest. U.K. is the second largest TV deal, though by the end of its run, India's TV deal will be a little bit bigger. Though U.K. is by far the second largest territory for all of the world. And then Canada is part of what the U.S. calls, or what WWE calls, domestic. And so Canada would be in the top 5. And then Germany is reputed to have a big market, and we do see a lot of live events being run there because it's got a good section of live event stadiums to hold events in, and does seem to have good consumption.
Australia,
probably, I would argue bigger than Australia. From a dollar standpoint, the Middle East, there's a reason they go to the Middle East a lot more than they go to Australia, which is because there's a bigger dollar values going on there, and they have a bigger surgence. Same with Mexico and Japan would be the other ones that would be right on that cusp, because obviously they do.
I thought about including Mexico, maybe Japan. I guess the thing is, with the Middle East, for one thing, there's no one country to pick out there that stands above the rest.
No, but I would say probably those would be so I mean, I think the top 4 are very clearly that, and then you get into the weird questions about how big is the Brazilian market, how big is the France market, how big is Spain, how big is you know, a lot of these other European countries where they have some presence and some existence.
And we're kind of jipping Ireland here. That's getting roped in with the UK as usual.
Yes, that is a good point. Is that yeah, Ireland would be in the top 10 for sure for WWE. So, yep. So those are good markets to look at. They're all English-speaking markets for the most part. You know, Germany obviously not, but a lot of English.
And there are a fairly good variety of areas throughout the globe, right? Like we've got North America, Europe, Asia, and South Pacific, right?
Mm-hmm. Again, that's why I think Mexico might give you an interesting thing, or there is some, you know, Latin American or South American countries that might give us a little bit more insight. But this is the right people to be focusing on, and this is where they are focusing on very clearly. You know, China would probably be the only other one. But again, when you're looking at China or Japan, you run the risk that you're not actually looking at people that use Google for trends, right? They don't use necessarily Google as their search engine in those countries. And so you're not always getting a very accurate look when you're looking at English terms being used by a US-based search engine.
Yeah, that's true. So what India has some other search engine that's really popular. Is it Baidu or something?
China does. That's a Chinese
China.
thing.
But doesn't India have its own popular search engine?
I am not familiar about where India is landing right now. And the same with Japan. You know, I know Yahoo is enormous in Japan. I don't know if they use it for the search engine as much, but you know, Yahoo Auctions is bigger than eBay in Japan, for instance. So if you're looking for laser discs as FMW, let's say, I don't know who would do that. Maybe me. You would go to Yahoo Auctions oftentimes. So
there you go. So I've collected all this data. And remember, this is all relative data, and it's relative within its own region, right? So it's comparing where there's a 100 here in this column for worldwide somewhere if we scroll down long enough. And again, that 100 is the standard that all the rest of the data points are held to. And again, that's just by region. So the US has a 100 somewhere in here, and are being held to that 100, and so on and so on.
Have you done a graph where you graph all 6 of these countries against the month kind of in the X value, so I can see whether they're all moving in the same directions in the same months?
What are you asking?
So like, could I look at the US line graph over time, and then the UK underneath that to see, is the UK peaking at the same periods that the US is, and Canada underneath that?
You want to look at this graph where I've averaged each, so there's 12 months in a year, right? So I've averaged the 12 months into 1 year, right? So here's worldwide in 2005. It goes back to 2004. So we should have 2004 in here as well, actually, but it's not here. But anyway, here's 2005. The average for the entire year 2005 across all 12 months was 41.
Can you graph this for me? I know you love showing me things in graphical things. I'm surprised you haven't done it already.
No, I don't
where
know.
I see what the US looks like and the worldwide and so forth.
But is it even meaningful to make that comparison, though? Because it's
yes, because I want to see whether or not, I mean, I would love to see it on a month-by-month basis, but I just want to see, are we seeing the same peak come in the same month for the same territories? So WrestleMania presumably is the same for all of them. I'm just kind of curious myself if I'm seeing the same trends, or whether I'm going to see, say, if India started to pick up in a time period where the US was not picking up, would that suggest to me that Indian interest in WWE has gone way up while WWE's interest is rather flat?
You're asking me to create a chart live on the air here.
I know, and I was like, he's going to hate me for this one.
I don't know if, let's see here.
So the x-axis you want to be a year.
Okay, I thought I just did that, and then they gave me a...
Yeah,
I always get confused here, you know? It takes me
y-axis, you want it to be the data set for...
I probably want to do this. Google, here we can talk about Google Docs and Google, whatever this is.
This is all crazy. This is not right.
Yeah, that's not right, is it? This is weird.
You're doing this very differently than I would, so
Really?
It's hard for me to give you live...
Well, keep talking.
Is this a Google? Are we looking at this in a Google Doc? Oh, that's why. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm so used to doing this stuff in Excel that it's so different for me. I know this is kind of humbling for you to disappoint our 5 viewers. It was 6 a few seconds ago. Now it's down to 5 because somebody was so frustrated out of rage they closed their laptop.
How can you blame them?
Yes. So did you just flip over to Excel?
Yeah.
Much better choice. Oh, you're doing spark lines. Oh, that's interesting.
No, I don't know what that is, dude. I don't know. I'm not messing with
I would do
spark lines.
Yeah, I do a line chart of just column A versus column B.
Series name. Yeah, now I know what I'm doing here. All right. Google Sheets is like the Excel thing for Google. that they have, so you can, which is really useful for us because we can share spreadsheets very easily with each other. But when it comes to like making charts and things like that, it has gotten better in the last few months, but it's still apparently not good enough that I know what I'm doing.
And I can show you how you can do this faster too, if you'd like to save
really?
some time.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to give me an Excel class.
So up there where it says start data range.
Well, it's too late now, but you can tell me while I'm doing it.
Well, you could have just changed the reference to go from basically B1 through B14 or H14 up at the top.
Okay, I'll pretend.
And then you might have had to rename the series in the end, but essentially it would do the same thing you just did. So that's great. All right, so this helps me a lot. So what I'm seeing here is a quick view of just kind of how are all of these following a very similar pattern, or are they following, is there a different development pattern that's going on here? And so you could see someone like Australia and say very quickly, oh, wow, Australia didn't rebound the way a lot of these other marketplaces did. At the same time, Canada did not rebound the way a lot of these marketplaces did. On the flip side, worldwide shoots up a lot on the basis of both US and then that light blue one, which is worldwide, and then the one below that, which is the dark blue one, which is India. So you can see really the influence of India as this overall marketplace that's bringing things above. And then lastly, there's the orangish one. I guess that was US. So what is
we got some ambiguity in colors here. Let me see if I can change that a little bit. So we got this purple.
Germany was the one I was
and maybe I'll make this like gray or something. And that's
so
India.
If I'm grouping these into kind of where things live, I would say Canada. What's the second to bottom one?
Second to bottom is Australia.
Second to bottom is Australia.
The green is Australia.
Here, under the yellow term, in between the yellow and the green term, what is that country?
India. IND is India.
No. I'm talking about actually in the month of 2017.
What do you
bring your cursor up?
Huh?
Bring it down to where the yellow Canada is.
Uh-huh.
What's the point right below that?
India?
No, that's the UK.
What? What is going on? Why
you have two grays. You have two grays. Is my point.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right.
That's where I was confused. Okay. Great. So
make it that color.
So I have two groups of countries here. Is what my takeaway here is. I have the UK, I have Canada, and I have Australia. So these former British colonies, somehow, they're all stuck together. Whereas I have the US,
English-speaking countries, right?
English-speaking countries, yes. And then on the flip side, I have India, the US, and Germany that are in this kind of top bucket where they're peaking much higher in 2017 than they were doing back in the 2005 to 2010 range. And I guess intuitively this does make sense, because what I would say is, where has WWE's focus been very heavily? Obviously on India, obviously on the US. I think the UK trend might be a little surprising to people, that, with the investment WWE has done into a UK type brand, even though I recognize they haven't launched it, you would think with the investment they've done on UK specific things, we would see an uptick very similar to what we've seen in these other countries. And so it's kind of intriguing to me that we're seeing kind of a flatness in the UK and much more of a peak going on in India. If we go and look at the actual dollars that are being generated in each of these regions, what we'd find is the US is generating the lion's share of the growth for this last year. Asia Pacific is up several $1 million and is probably being driven by a combination of Japan, Australia, and most notably India. And that the UK numbers spiked in 2015 when they got the huge TV deal signed, and they got all the money for that. That went up by like $20 million year over year in the UK generation. But since then, it's actually been very flat. Now, on top of this, that makes it always confusing, is NXT has chosen to tour different areas of the world and generate a few extra $1 million. So one year NXT did the UK tour, one year NXT did the Australia tour. So they've kind of jumped around a little bit of where they're putting that extra money, and live events does include NXT live revenue, even though the attendance trends don't. Mm-hmm. So a lot of different little things happening here. What this says to me is Canada's not a hot market for WWE. I'm not really surprised, because basically ever since they signed that 10-year deal with Rogers in 2014, they haven't done a huge investment, in my opinion, about Canada. Though you could argue the push of Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens and some of these other people demonstrate that they do have some ability to move in Canada. And of course, they just signed a new deal in Quebec for French-speaking television and some other things that they've done, some smaller deals they've done in Canada. But this just is intriguing to me, just to say that, you know, not all countries seem to be rising at the same level. Would you agree with that? That we kind of have a difference of kind of two different buckets coming into this last 2 years?
Yeah, but they're moving in similar ways, especially in 2016, and something's happening back here in 06 to 09.
And that's when the European, you know, market got super duper hot, and it was really good for WWE to go be over in Europe and make a lot of their money. And wrestling was hot, and then it kind of crashed after that. So
we can see it going up in 08 in the US as well.
Yeah. And again, 08 was actually a high watermark for them financially. If you look at the numbers, 08 was like a year. I think 09, they actually lost revenue year over year, if you looked at it on a revenue basis. But actually, that might be very interesting is plot this against revenue in the future, Google trend versus revenue overall for the US, and just kind of see, or domestic revenue, since that's broken out for North America, to see what that looks like. But yeah, it's just intriguing to me to just understand, do all countries move in the same direction at the same time? And yes, they generally do, but there are times when someone might peak earlier and then they don't return to that same peak years later.
Mm-hmm.
And India's surgence over the last 3 years here is really remarkable, where you can see India in the past from 05 to 2012 was very low. It was almost always the lowest of the group. And then India now has moved to be the top of the group in 2016, which reflects a lot of the increased media saturation, the WWE network launch in India, and then of course the marketing going on in India. You know, everything from Kavita Devi to bring back Great Khali. Right?
Jinder Mahal, obviously. And do you think this
well, Jinder Mahal would not be 2016.
Right. So what I'm saying is, look at this, it peaks
Neither
in
would Great Khali, technically. Yeah.
And do you think they see this data and they think, well, let's put the title on somebody who's of Indian descent, you know?
Well, when they say 75% of our social media views come from international territories, and the majority of that is India, I mean, it's hard not to...
No, I think we discussed that. Do we know the majority? I think that's just something that's been repeated.
I feel like that came out of the comments that George Barrios made about India and the opportunities in India. I would have to. I feel
like that's a anxiety influenced comment that's been repeated by people who are talking about Jinder Mahal. But
I agree. I agree that we don't know that the majority of the worldwide views that are not coming from the US are India driven. We do know that if we look at Google Trends, we can see India has an enormous uptick in interest there. We know that they've invested heavily in the media structure there. They've invested in creating their own, specific shows in Hindi, specifically so they can better, reach Indian marketplaces through their agreement on, what was it, Sony 10 Sports?
Yes.
So we see them doing some things to make us think that a lot of it's coming, and the fact that domestically we're not seeing the subscriptions follow, and that we do see, like, I think some people have run some analytics on Twitter followers and stuff like that. We do see, India spiking up on a lot of these YouTube views, maybe is even where they're getting some of this information from. But I agree. We don't know conclusively that 3/4 of all international views are coming from India. That's an exaggeration. We know a large portion of them probably are, though.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you keep in mind other big markets like China aren't really on YouTube.
Yeah. So when we go back, you want to go back to this thing?
Yes, I'm satisfied with to me, that just, maybe to you, it doesn't tell the same things, but to me, that tells me more of the story in a way that I can start grasping onto it than even looking at this chart full of numbers.
I think it tells something that you notice that's true more than I notice it.
Yeah. So what I get away from this then is I look at, we have 2005 through 2017, and then the first column, WWE's worldwide, and it goes 41, 50, 69, 74, 65, 64, 59, 61, 60, 57, 60, 77, 66. So we started at a low end of a 41, 50 back in 05, 06. And then we hit a mini peak in 08 at 74. And then it kind of languishes between 09 and 2015 in the mid 60s, dropping as low as 59 and as high as 65.
Yep.
And then in 2016, it peaks again at 77. And 2017, we're back in the mid 60s, this time at 66, which would be the highest number since 2009, save 2016, but still is not a all-time high by any means. I'm always
on
a little.
its face, I would look at this and think, well, numbers start to go up in this period. And maybe that's that's around the time that John Cena and Batista started to become big stars and things start to go up. And then there's this period here from about 09 to 15, maybe, that are just kind of mediocre. Yeah, there's some markets that really got hot in that era. I'm just talking about Google interest, but Germany and Australia, well, especially Germany, right? Because even it did go up in Australia as well. But the point is, did something happen in 2016 that made WWE more popular, or can this be explained by something else other than genuine interest?
I think we're looking at Google Trends, and then we're applying the term interest to them. And as we well know, there's many people who turn on a television and never go online. We know that there's people who tweet online who never turn on a television.
Yeah, and I should point out too, Liz, so when I've done research based on Google Trends before, they'll say, well, but more people throughout these years are Googling more and more. So you really you're not taking that into account. But the Google Trend data points themselves are already adjusted for that, because the relative values that we get here are all based on the total number of searches overall
of people that were online in that day. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not like Google's way more popular now, so these numbers should be way bigger than these numbers back here. That's not the case. It's adjusted for that. At least that's what it says in the Google help page about these Google Trends.
Yeah, it's adjusted for the audience that was available at the time. I think I would still argue there was a lot more people online in 2015, especially in some of these countries like India, than there was in 2005. So I do think it's not
Google Trends should adjust for that, because it's based on the total number of searches for everything, not just WWE.
But I'm saying the availability of broadband internet has exploded in the last 10 years in a way that people that 10 years ago could not even been online are now being represented in these searches. So, if you're a low income family living in a city 10 years ago, you might not have had internet access. Now you have it on your phone every day.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm saying your audience has changed a little bit too in this. So I agree, of people online in 2005, they're being very representative. I'm just saying, I think the number of people online in 2005, when Facebook was a brand new thing compared to 2015, is hugely different. Mm-hmm. And so I do take 05 and 06 a little bit with a grain of salt, especially when we get to some of these international markets. I think what the story I see here very clearly is that when the US was struggling, they were propped up by Europe in 07 and 08. Then when some of Europe began to kind of cool down from 09 to 13, the US was kind of languishing. And if we looked at the revenue and the profits during this time, what we'd see is steady profits, steady revenue, very little excitement. And, their stock also reflected this. This is when they're, basically locked back into a deal, but they also recognize that they don't really have anything exciting to kind of sell to investors. And things like Classics on Demand and whatnot aren't really exploding in any way. The film division isn't really exploding in any way. If anything, it's becoming a laggard on the entire system. And they're struggling to figure out what are they going to do. They're getting out of, their old THQ deal. They're going into their new 2K deal, stuff like that. It's a time of transition, is what I see.
And I think what the average fan most commonly misunderstands is, I think the common fan assumes that WWE's business is much more volatile than it is. Like there's an assumption that an angle can change things, or that this year things are changing or getting worse or getting better. And this business and pro wrestling, I think in general, is less and less affected by things like angles, and especially WWE's very efficient corporate machine is less and less vulnerable to, uncertainty, or some big angle happening, or some star not getting over. Even their ratings declining as they has not stopped this machine.
Yeah, and again, it's the difference between revenue, interest, and whatever other metrics we want to put on here. Their revenue generation mechanism is very solid. Their interest generation mechanism is probably dependent on what angles they're running time to time. We do see that changing. Those trend lines you looked at for those wrestlers show that when John Cena proposes to Nikki Bella, it gets buzz. When Brock Lesnar wrestles Samoa Joe, it looks like it has an effect on the interest in that. But a lot of times those are short-lived spikes. And like you say, they're very unrelated to the business. And that, I think, is one of the takeaways Dave Meltzer had on the last quarter's earnings that I agree with, which was last quarter, we lost about 68,000 subscribers worldwide. A year ago, we lost 61,000 subscribers worldwide. Arguably, this last year has, in the quarter, had much stronger pay-per-view events and much stronger build, and yet it had very little effect on the overall WWE Network subscriber business, which doesn't seem to be much of a modular business. Meanwhile, pay-per-view buys, which is plummeted, is a tiny part of the business, grew 24% according to the 10Q in the percentage of buys over that time, suggesting people that did care to watch these events did go out and buy them on pay-per-view if they didn't have a network subscription, or if they were in a marketplace that only offered it on pay-per-view. And so I thought that was really interesting, because it says to me that, yes, you can do an attraction-based business for pay-per-view, but you're not a pay-per-view based business anymore. And as a network-based business, it's just about the slow and steady.
Yeah. So the biggest takeaway I got from this was, and we can show the percentages in just a second, that everybody's about this level, 60, 60, 45, 44, and so on. They go up in 2016, and then everybody's down, right? 77 to 66, 67 to 60, 51 to 42, 51 to 45, 81 to 63, 41 to 34, 73 to 61. Everybody's down. So if you look at that from I'll just click on the thing. So we're looking at, in these cells here, let's compare 2005 to the year before, 2004. And what is the change in terms of a percentage? So
your point here, Beers, 05 I grew, 06 I grew,
yep.
06, 07 I started to flatline, 08 I started to drop in most places, 09 I was dropping, and then 2010 to 2014 I'm basically flat. I'm up a couple percent, I'm down a couple percent. Yeah. Maybe a market or two I might be going up. And then 2015, 2016, I see a country like India exploding, and that's driving the worldwide number up. But all the other marketplaces, with the exception of maybe Germany, are actually in single-digit growth. And then 2017, 10 months in, compared to a full month 2016 number, which is a little apples and oranges because we're missing October, November, December. I'm sorry, November, December.
We're missing, just November, and December.
We see negative numbers across the board. And my point is, when you're down 20% from 2016, or you're down 14%, I guess is the number here. What's the absolute number though on worldwide? It's still actually the second highest number over the last 10 years, right?
Right. It is
66 compared to from 2009 to 2016. Only once has it been hotter. So while the overall number has
3 years where it was bigger.
3 years. Well, I'm not counting. I'm going from 2008 or 2009. From 2009 to 2017, it's the second highest. And so that tells me, yes, it's cooler than it was a year ago, but let's not also fool ourselves into thinking cooler means dead. Because if you're red hot, I was going to say rock hard, but that's a bad analogy. If you're red hot, you go down by a percentage, you can still be hotter than you were before.
And while I'm thinking about it, we should consider too that interest, it doesn't necessarily mean positive interest. Like this 2007 year is skewed by the Chris Benoit murders. Great
point. And that's something that we see a lot when we look at WWE trends over time, is that, same with Paige, right? Like we said, Paige was one of the top 4 people. She's not one of the top 4 people because people are so into her in-ring work. The fact that so many pictures and videos of her have been spread over the internet over the last year has had a huge impact on Paige shooting up in these trends.
So like the 100 standard that we talk about in the case of WWE, their 100 standard is June 2007, and that's when the Chris Benoit murders happen. So interest doesn't always mean good interest.
It doesn't mean it's productive for the company,
but I would think generally, with some big exceptions, generally I think it does have to do with it. I think it doesn't necessarily relate to revenue of the company overall, but I do think it relates to how many people are interested in thinking about WWE. Like, I think that's why Google Trends are valuable, because they give us an idea of what people are thinking about. And I can break this down by a region and by a range of time. So I think that can be really insightful.
I think, like any tool, it gives us more information rather than less information. And depending on what conclusions we draw from it, it will hopefully make us better in our holistic understanding of what's changing in this business. I think it's easy to overemphasize any one tool, and especially the simplest tools that there are at your fingertips. Sometimes we become too reliant on it. And so like every year when Dave does his breakdown of like the top 100 athletes based on Google Trends, I always have some issues about, is it right to be comparing X with Y? Because, the 10th biggest soccer star, is it really comparable to say that they're more popular or less popular?
And I think a lot of it has to do with like how often you're on TV. Like, let's compare Conor McGregor to John Cena. Let me see what the result is here. But like John Cena on average this is over the last, let's just look at the last 12 months. Okay, well, it's a different thing. All right. So Conor McGregor was in the huge fight with Mayweather, and that put him way over. So I guess that's not the example that I wanted. What about Ronda Rousey? Yeah. Okay, so John Cena's in the last 12 months has a little more interest on average throughout the entire period than Ronda Rousey does. But when Ronda Rousey, this is probably when she had her last UFC fight, she's 100-7 compared to John Cena. Or like,
can you bring the time frame down to the last 6 months?
Yep. Let's see here.
Or 90 days, whatever. Just some time frame that takes out that one event.
Okay.
And we can see, depending on the point in the year, she's had some times where she's flirted with being as popular as Cena, like in the end of August. And then the rest of the time here. And that end of August time frame would probably be around the Mae Young Classic, right?
This is when
she's shooting angles.
This is when the Mae Young Classic, I think, starts to drop on the network because it was taped back in June or something. Yeah, this is the week. Maybe this and that. This is every day though. But anyway, the end of August is when the first round dropped, I think.
So we can, yes, I think it gives us a idea of how to compare X and Y sometimes, but it doesn't always mean X versus Y is more popular, because there's also that idea of why is someone searching for certain terms over time? Is that mean that they're really more interested in them, or is it because some news is broken about them, like we talked about there? And, clearly a lot of people are more willing to look for certain pictures of female athletes online than they might be looking for male athletes who they have a different interest in at that time. So
we can take a look at that, actually.
Yeah, more people want pictures of John Cena than Ronda Rousey. So, we should be using this to optimize. You and I have found that there are certain terms that if we add to our podcast, it does seem to make us more popular. And both Ronda Rousey and John Cena are two of those terms. So we have learned that over time. So let's get back to
in fact, we've grown from 4 viewers to 7 in the time that we've started talking about John Cena and Ronda Rousey. But anyway.
Well, that could have just been me continuously trying to tweet out this link and then deleting the tweet and then retweeting it. And so that might have caused some bizarre counting. But yes, hopefully there are more viewers. And if you are a viewer and you want to comment right now, we do have a live chat box going on YouTube, and we are monitoring that. So you're welcome to quote on things. So you have all these data points. You have all these countries of the world. Can you give me some conclusions or takeaways here? I think one of your first takeaway was that 2017 is a little cooler than it was 2016. India has become a force in the last 3 years for being a big worldwide market. And sometimes when we say worldwide WWE is up, we might actually just be talking about the over influence from the Indian market, it appears like, because some of these other markets are not showing nearly the growth. I put words in your mouth for 2 of those. What other
well, let me explain what I did here. So I want to show you this other tab called descriptions here, but I want to explain how I got to what's in there first. So I broke these all down by month. For each region. So they have the United States for January through December for each year, and you can compare those across the years, and you can do that for the UK and for Canada and so forth. So then this isn't necessary to understand what we're doing here, but I transposed them. Basically I just changed the axes here, and I defined that if you've got, let's see, if you made a difference of between -5% and +5%, I'm going to define that as little change. And if it's, I think, over 5%, but it's more than 5%, but less than 10%, I'm calling that a slight increase. I think it's more than 10%, but less than, I think it's 15 or 25, then I'm calling that moderate increase. And then we don't have any examples of it in here, but you go up to like 50%, I'm not going to call that an exceptional increase. So basically, I've taken these ranges of difference and given them names, which I hope you will agree are fair.
Yeah, though I got to teach you how to use VLOOKUP comma true, because you're, instead of writing a 57,000 linked if statement, I can show you how you can do this using just a simple VLOOKUP with then instead of comma false, it's a comma true.
Yeah. So this is how I wrote the formula for all you Excel fans out there.
It's so inefficient. It's so angry.
All right. So anyway, what we get out of all that stuff is, let's take all the regions that we're looking at here, all 7 of them, if you include worldwide, and look at the difference over each year from the year prior. Okay. And what we get here is we get a really nice, consistent, moderate decrease across 10 months. As you said, it's not quite apples to apples, because we're looking at all 12 months of 2016 versus just the first 10 months of 2017. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah, and I could even see a model here where what you would do is come up with some weighting. So let's say we have revenue split by region, right? We do get that every quarter, every year. And I could take those revenue splits, and what I could do with them is I could assign each one of these countries that you've put here some index of what their value is. And so I might say, well, 75% of my money comes from the US and Canada. So they both get a 75 index. And the UK is the next biggest, and it represents 12%. So I'm going to put a 12 there. And then I would, instead of having my worldwide just be equal to the flat number that they decide to mash them all together, I would rather take my weightings and then apply them to all the countries and come up with my weighted revenue index. So that while India might be driving a lot of searches, since it's such a small part of my revenue index, it would actually get a much lower number.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we're looking at within the country themselves, right? They're not being held to any wider standard. They're being held to the standard of their own country's performance in the previous year.
Yeah. So I would almost suggest that we create the Wrestlenomics revenue index, where you take those different things, and then that way it would say, hey, you know what? A slight increase in the US is worth a whole lot more than a massive increase in India. Or something.
Someday when people reflect on the history of professional wrestling, they're going to talk about the Mookie Index. I bet there's going to be some stat like that.
The Mookonomics.
There you go.
Something there. So yeah, I think it's you're creating your interesting storyline that says basically WWE interest has decreased this year moderately in all these different key countries of the world. And part of that is just because they didn't.
Again, let's stress, this doesn't mean that W business is about to die. No, this company's making more money every year, more revenue and more profit, or no, we can get into that as well. But interest has decreased across the board, it looks like, based on Google Trends at least. Maybe there's fewer people searching for WWE for whatever reason. But again, that doesn't mean that everybody's...
Let's look at the Wrestlenomics document really quickly, and this ties in well to the thing I've been talking about, which is average North American event attendance trailing 12 months excludes WrestleMania. So what I did here is I took all the quarterly numbers of what was happening, how many events did they run, and then I figured out what the trailing 4 months or 4 quarters were, so that I had a full year's worth every 12, so I could look at a 12-month view continuously going on. So the first thing you would notice when you look at this line is you'd say, oh, they run on average 300 some events per year. And this would only include the Raw and SmackDown touring brands. This doesn't include
just main roster. And we're looking at number of events over here, right?
On orange.
And that's on the right side. So the orange is the number of events.
Yes, orange is number of events. And then the blue line represents the average number of attendance at a North American show. And this is going to be a combination of both TV attendance,
that makes sense. Okay.
house show attendance, but it excludes one event per year, which is WrestleMania. So I don't include WrestleMania in my number. And I get these numbers, of course, from WWE's KPIs. Every quarter, they publish what the attendance is, and they also publish what the number is without WrestleMania. And then what I just do is I do a weighted average where I say if I know that it's 5,000, 5,200, 5,400, 5,600, I multiply by the number of events for each of those 4 quarters, divide it by the total number of events, I have the average attendance. And since I can look at the number without WrestleMania in it, I can look at that number altogether. So what I see is for years and years, from the beginning of 2014 through the end of 2016, they pretty much always ran an average of 300 some events a year on the main brands. And then in Q1, Q2, Q3, that number starts creeping up. And I should point out, this is North American events. That's 300 North American events plus the, several dozen that they run internationally every year when they go on the European tour, once in the kind of the late, right post WrestleMania period, and once in kind of November right now, like they are. And then sometimes they do an Asia tour in the summer, and then they do a South American tour at least once or twice a year. What's really
Q1 here, it starts to creep up, but it's comparable.
No. 2017 it creeps up. 2017 is where I'd be like, oh my gosh, look at that. They're now running more events. And that's the big takeaway here is WWE has taken a model where they said, instead of us running 300 some North American events a year, we want to get that number up to 325. We want to get, 20 plus more events on an annual year.
The brand split happens right here in Q3, and it takes them a little while to reorganize their house show schedule to where they're really having separate house shows that are Raw house shows and SmackDown house shows. That really starts to, so brand split is July 2016, so that's in this quarter, but it's early in this quarter, and then you see the events start to creep up in Q4, and even more so in Q1 and the rest of the year. Yeah.
But what's kind of surprising to me is the blue line represents your average North American 12-month attendance non-WrestleMania. And so Q2 2014, it's right at that 6,000 number. Q1 2014, it was 5,800. Depending on, the trends of the year, it can drop as low as 5,700. It can be as high as a little above 6,000. But starting in 2016, you start to see that number slipping. And again, that number is slipping for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're starting to run branded house shows. So we've taken our star power and we've cut it in half. And we've said each house show is only going to have about half as much star power. Number two, we're adding in more events, especially by 2017. We see the impact of that. But throughout 2016, we start to see that increase in North American events. And what that means is we're going to have a higher percentage of events be non-television events. And the higher percentage it is, that's going to be a lower average on attendance, which means it's going to drag down your attendance average. And then by the middle of 2017, we're also starting to see those TV events start to drop, right? We're starting to see those Raws and SmackDowns not selling out, maybe even playing small buildings and not selling out. And so what this is telling me is that a number that had consistently sat between 5,700 and 66,000 per event in the last 4 quarters has dropped all the way down to 5,400. Now, this isn't ring the alarm bells, WWE's burning. What this is to me is that WWE has made a choice to emphasize volume over individual event, maximization. And so if their break even on WWE events is, say, 2,200 people, I don't remember the exact number I calculated. I think it was actually below 2,000, but I'll say it's even 2,500, they're still at 2x that number. They're still turning a profit on these events. It's still profitable for them to keep everybody busy. And it's especially profitable for them to keep people busy Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, instead of skipping Monday just because half the people aren't necessarily on television. So it's not a bad model to say at 5,400 people that you're dying, but I think it is surprising to see that, they raise the number of events and their attendance is dropping. And if they continue to keep at this level and then we see attendance continuing to drop, I don't know how much more juice there is from this lime. At a certain point, you can only squeeze so much money at the very top tier from the best people, and that you will start seeing an impact happening to them. I think right now, this chart tells you very much that North America is being juiced by running more events, and actually in aggregate, they're reaching more people worldwide than they have in some of the prior years. So even while interest is down, I think worldwide attendance is going to be up this year, which is another thing that you might not expect.
And just to support the point that you're making about how they're running more shows, but the types of shows that they're running are house shows. They're not running more SmackDown TV tapings. Obviously, they're not running more Raw tapings, although they are running a few more pay-per-views. But in the grand scheme of things, that's just a few more across 300 events.
Yeah, so 300 North American events, exactly.
And so it's a really small percentage of pay-per-views.
Yeah, it just the dilution, is just not enough. And even there where it says Raw tapings at 9,600, I bet you anything Raw tapings are down this year from 9,600. Same with SmackDown tapings at 6,000, which speaks a lot to also the difference between Raw and SmackDown, both in terms of star power, but also in terms of attendance power. We've seen that for years and years and years. That domestically, there's a difference. Sometimes when you go internationally, It's different. And the
something that I
charts you
looked
were
at.
looking at there are actually worldwide. They were not domestic only.
Yeah, and that's something I looked at in this. I did an article about this for Fightful, where I looked at the attendances in the Observer and compared them to previous years. So these are SmackDown TV and this is Raw TV, and you can compare them in each month, like what the average was. And this is incomplete data, but it gives you an idea. In September, yeah, it was kind of flat. I don't know.
So alarm bells, no. Is there a concern that perhaps you're growing your volume without growing your audience? Yes. Is there is it the right thing to do? I'd still say yes, because I'd say if you're still sitting healthily above 5,000 people per show on an average, it's more valuable for you to keep running this. Now, is it good for the talent? Is it good for the logistics manager? Is it good for the crew that has to travel show to show? I don't know about that. And I worry about that sometimes, that, you might burn out, or you might suffer a catastrophic injury in such a way that it could really hurt your business. Like a bunch of people could get mumps at the same time and something bad would happen.
So I think the key question is this attendance decline that we see here, what's to blame for that? Can we blame it all on just volume and saturation? I doubt it. I think some of it has to go to, because I don't feel like and we're looking at just North America here. I don't feel like, the number of events are up, but I don't think the number of events are up so high. And I don't think the United States is such a small geographical area that you can just chalk all of this decline up to more volume. What do you think?
And somebody asked me a while ago, not a while ago, but a little bit ago, Lavi asked me, do you think there'd be possible for WWE to create a Legends touring brand where, you take these old legends and then you're running house shows based on them? And I gave a bunch of, kind of non-answers. I said, look at the ECW experiment, look at some of these other things that didn't go very well. But my final answer was this, which was the people that you're attracting with a Legends type promotion are not the people that are going to house shows anymore. And so you're really struggling to kind of create a market there for something that has not been, well served, where those are the fans that are watching on television. They're watching on the network. Maybe they even buy some merchandise, but they're not as a whole going to a lot of live events, right? And so I'm not sure that it would do you much good to create an entire live touring experience for a group of people that don't go to live events.
But I guess to play devil's advocate, the argument would be that, well, they don't go to live events because they don't care for that product, at least enough to go to a live event for it. And maybe the thing that they're missing is the connection with certain personalities that they had a deeper connection with in the past. And if you advertised these personalities to them at a live event, you could capture them. You could capture their ticket revenue, which you are not capturing now.
Yep. I just think sometimes it's like you're talking about developing a new, a lot of people don't like hot tubs. Here's a new kitchen mixer. And I'd be like, what? Because you're talking about solution X for problem Y. And so I just think that you're talking about inventing a new category of live events for a different group of people. And maybe they're underserved. So that's a great thing to do. But I don't see it as a natural extension of the current live events business. And so that's what makes me challenged by it. I think in the way that, I think it's actually very powerful to use a Kurt Angle on television as a commissioner is very good because it links people back into the product. And I'll tell you, the truth was when people heard Kurt Angle was wrestling at TLC, I do know people that wanted to go to that pay-per-view that didn't care about it before. And so there's something to be said about, linking to legends is interesting to people and it drives an interest. So maybe, but I also think there's a difference between live event and pay-per-view house, pay-per-view attraction. Like there's a different push and pull on that. Mm-hmm. So that's my 2 cents on that. And that is my only chart that I'm going to be showing here. So everything else is going to be Brandon content and Brandon thoughts. What do we got right here? The WWE Monday Night Raw live plus same day TV ratings. Yeah. We have 12 months. We have 2017 through 2013 for those of you just listening online. And I see red numbers where numbers are down, and I see green where it's up. And I'd say of this spreadsheet, I spot maybe 20 green and maybe 40 red.
Yeah. So even while all this is going on, we're just talking about how interest is marginally down across a variety of regions. And so you would think that to go along with that narrative, we would have in this, and remember we're just talking about 2017, but you would think, so in 2017, we would see a continuation of the trend that we've seen in the entirety of 2016 and 17, which is TV ratings in the US have declined. So you look at 2013, and ratings in most months were actually up. But in 2014, that became more split, and I think we've got more red percentages here than green percentages. And then by 2015, it's down every month. And again, if it's not clear from the table that we're looking at here, I'm comparing, say, the entirety of January 2014, the average rating for January 2014 compared to the average rating in January 2013. And I'm asking, what is the difference between January 2013 average rating and January 2014 average rating? And in this case that I'm mousing over here, the difference is 1%. So anyway, you look at 2015, and that metric is down by double digits more often than not, or about half the time. And then you look at 2016, and then it is double digits in every year except for, in every month except for November 2016. And then 2017, it looks like it's going to be more of the same. And then something happened in July and August where it starts to this inevitable decline that just seems to rage on in the last 2 years starts to soften. And my God, in September 2017, it's actually up 3% from the same month in the previous year.
And some of that could be that we hit the artificial low in 2016 because the election was such a time suck that by September of 2016...
And the Olympics, Dave will always bring up the Olympics and the election.
Yeah. Yep. So both of those really hurt you in 2016. So you bottomed out more than maybe the interest level was, where people forced to choose between two things chose, debates or something else. And then now that we're out of that, a business that is doing okay is going to bounce back better from a period.
But I think that the presidential election Olympics thing, that really only applies to like this area of time. And there was certainly some momentum happening in 2015.
Oh yeah, no, I think we had a train that was hurtling down a canyon, and then it hit a set of tracks that was much lower than anyone would have expected because there was a pit it could fall into.
And I think
I don't think the momentum was ever as low as a 1.93. I don't think we were ever at a place where the interest in wrestling was that low. I think it was the interest in wrestling was artificially impacted by something else being such a bigger story. And I do think wrestling interest is dropping. Just not. I don't think it was actually at the rock bottom at that point. It was just too distracted. And so we've continued the decline, and we're getting closer to that rock bottom. Much in the same way we've seen WWE Network subscriber acquisition kind of level off at 1.5 million. And you can argue, oh, well, I could do this or that, this and this and build it up. But now you're arguing about how you get to 1.6 million or 1.65 million. You're not arguing about how you're going to get to 2 million or let alone 2.5 million. Same with ratings here. We can get ratings up above 2, right? But can we really get them above 3 again? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I think, to your point, here's September. The Olympics ended by the end of August, but that maybe they're a factor in this month here in August where it's 17%, which is higher than it was earlier in the year. I'm sorry, lower than it was earlier in the year. And then September, it's the lowest. It's lowest in any piece of time that we're looking at here. So maybe that was the presidential election, but I think there's a larger story here, which is probably changes in media that are sucking your time away. And maybe whether you still subscribe to cable or satellite or not.
I wish I could see what AVOD would be like during this time, like ad-supported video on demand.
It's funny you ask that.
Oh, look at that.
And I'm not saying that, everybody's watching it on YouTube and Hulu now. I think that's a piece of the story, but the larger thing is I think that just the varieties of media that ask for our attention are becoming so great that that it takes time away from the time that we would spend to actually sit on the couch and watch Raw or SmackDown live. But we're looking at Raw TV ratings here, actually.
So you pulled up
SmackDown's a weirder thing to deal with because of all the network changes and the change from going to live and the change from the brand split and so forth.
So you pulled up a chart here for those of you that are just listening and not looking at this live, that shows AVOD views, which is ad-supported video on-demand views across YouTube, Facebook, and WWE.com. So for 2013, it's sitting somewhere between 600 million to 800 million a quarter. Then for 2014, it goes from 900 million, and then we start to see this peaking up. And by the end of 2014, we're up to 1.3 billion. 2015 builds into 1.6 billion, and then we start seeing some big jumps. So
Yeah.
Q1, 1.6 billion, Q2, 2.1 billion, Q3, 3 billion, Q4.
And an important
3
distinction
billion.
we should make here too is this is a global metric. Okay, and what we just looked at here, these are ratings, and that's just a U.S. metric. That just refers to the viewership that happens for Raw on the USA Network.
And as we've said many times, 75+% of your revenue is still coming from the US, which is one of the reasons that US ratings are so important to this business.
And we actually have a graph for that too, where you can see over time, I feel like, yes, this is the obligatory, yes, digital media, which I think is majority YouTube revenue.
It's YouTube revenue. If you go back to 2012 and 2013, depending on what source you pull it from, they throw in magazine publishing. Because when they discontinued that, they threw it into digital media for year-over-year comparisons. But if you pull that data right, you won't get that if you look at the of the time data. So it just depends on kind of where you pulled it. But it's really insignificant. It's not like magazine publishing was huge. But your point is this graph that we're looking at is that TV rates go from little under $10 million a quarter on EBITDA, all the way up to $30 million by the end of 2017. So from 2012 to 2017, tripling, whereas digital is flat when you put a trend line on it, which basically says it's barely been profitable in many quarters. And then when it is profitable, you might get 3 million or 4 million out of it. And then by the time the year is done, if you max that out with the quarters that were negative, maybe you'll have $1 or $2 million of OIBDA profit, until the most recent quarter where they started negative on Q1, positive in Q2, and Q3 was even higher. And it'll be interesting because we see that trend somewhat similar in earlier quarters. I'll be very curious whether Q4 is higher for them, because I do think that they're starting to figure out their digital media, OIBDAization, AVOD capture strategy, which is the most ridiculous sentence I've had to say in some time. But it basically says, I think they're figuring out ways to get YouTube and Facebook and WWE.com to give them more money for people watching billions with a B of videos every quarter. And yet they're making almost no money compared to TV rights, where they're making triple what they made 5 years ago. And it continues to be the leading driver of their OIBDA for the year. And it continues to be basically the whole reason why TV ratings should matter to WWE is great. People are watching in other ways. Interest might not be down, but you know what? TV ratings, which is very valuable to NBC Universal and the USA Network, that's what they're paying you a bunch of money for. And so it's kind of silly to sometimes just completely ignore the fact that they need to keep NBC Universal happy.
So I think the reason why there's alarmism about WTV ratings is because I guess there's a lack of context. I don't know everything about the TV industry, obviously, but my guess is that there's a bundle that's being held together by live programming, such as sports, and maybe, I don't know if on cable, are there anything like reality shows like Dancing with the Stars or anything like that, but WWE.
Kardashians.
Okay.
But that's not a reality-based activity show. But I mean, for years and years, it was, Walking Dead is huge, and so is the Deadliest Catch and things like that. So I mean, there's those certain kinds of shows. But Game of Thrones is big when it's big, and it's not when it's not.
But even The Walking Dead isn't as important to watch live. I guess it can be if everybody's talking about it and tweeting about it, and maybe texting their friends about it.
Well, I think Westworld and Game of Thrones really showed that you can make television programming very appointment television. I would watch Game of Thrones every week. I watch Forged by Fire and everything else on tape demand. Superstore. I don't stay up to watch any of these shows. I couldn't even tell you when a lot of these shows air anymore. I just wait to see them show up on Hulu or watch them on demand.
Yeah. So I don't know. My point was, I don't know. It's really weird, right? That TV ratings are going down. TV money is going up. Video views are going up, but the money that we actually make in the end and in some form of profit is completely flat.
And that's Barrios' argument. Money will follow the eyeballs. And so if I can quintuple, go from less than 1 billion views in 2012 to 5 billion or whatever in 2017, I can.
Isn't this? Could you make an analogy of like there might have been people in the 50s, as early as the 50s, who might have said, we can't put matches on TV. If we put matches on TV, nobody's going to want to go to the live events.
That was true up into the 70s and the 80s, where you'll see a Muhammad Ali boxing poster and it will say there is no radio coverage of this event.
Right. And I bet they weren't getting very much TV money, if at all, right? Like early TV, and even going through the 80s, it's some of it's paid programming, like, right? Like Vince paid to be on some stations when he was going nationwide, right?
We're mixing a lot of different metaphors here. Mike Sempervive has actually a very interesting unpublished thing he's done all about the history of boxing. And one of the things that comes out in that is that you see boxing, much like wrestling, where the innovations developed to create pay-per-view programming so that they can bring live events, but revenue generation from it is fascinating. And so I would actually say it's the opposite, where we see them coming up with ways to, charge the first $100, pay-per-view event, and then the Mike Tyson craze in the 80s and the early 90s. And, some of the earliest pay-per-view technology was developed by kind of boxing promoters, where they wanted to figure out a way to basically sell an event and then make it so that people couldn't illegally stream it or watch it. And so you do see that actually a lot, where like people have figured out ways to take when there's demand and eyeballs and ways to charge lots of money for it. And so in some ways, the WWE Network is kind of going against that entire trend, which is historically I can charge more and more for my premium content live that's delivered in this way, or I can charge more and more to a rights holder for the content. And instead we went to a Netflix model, which is a very revolutionary model when you come to the history of pricing in media.
Yeah, this is a very Vince McMahon move, isn't it, to go direct to consumer? I'm going to go my own way.
Well, I think it's very much the way of saying, look at the subscriber growth on Netflix year over year, and they offer a flat bundle for a price. And why would you go to the movie theater anymore when for $10 a month, you get 10,000 movies, whereas for $14, you get one movie for 2 hours. So it's an interesting thing.
My point was, I think there's a lot of people who are saying, well, why are they putting their stuff on YouTube? It's going to cannibalize their TV ratings. And I think there's a lesson from history that we should, I don't know if it's going to forecast the future, but maybe we've seen this before, where you're saying that this is going to cannibalize our other more valuable business, just as maybe TV we thought was going to cannibalize a live event. Maybe someday, somehow, there will be a way to better monetize this stuff than there is now.
Yeah, and I think that there's that big question of saying, going into this next rights renewal, will they sell their digital rights in a different way than they've sold it historically? Will they, not give exclusivity to NBCU? Will they find some other platform that's willing to pay money for it? And to be honest, WWE didn't seem very hot on that idea at the last one, where they kind of shut down those rumors of the Facebooks or the Amazons or the Microsofts or whoever paying a bunch of money to get the exclusive rights. And rather that they said, we still think a bundle is going to exist in the future. We think that we have a place on that bundle, and live events is a big reason to keep that bundle. And I think it's the glue for the bundle, right? That's the only way you can justify having cable TV, is not the ability to pick and choose, but rather the ability just to get the entire stuff you want, knowing that you're subsidizing other things. And, as a fan, I've always been frustrated I have to pay for ESPN, but I'm not frustrated enough to go to Sling and just start picking and choosing, I guess.
Yep. Anything else? Do you want to talk about your Seeking Alpha thing?
Yeah, we'll talk about
our 10-minute YouTube. Our 10-minute YouTube bonus has turned into an hour and 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. We'll make this work. So I wrote an article for Seeking Alpha that Brandon's going to pull up right now.
Do I just click on it? Okay.
Exactly. And it was called WWE Should Heed the Lessons from its 2014 Crash Before its Upcoming TV Rights Negotiations. And it was kind of funny how I came up with this premise of the article, because I just started kind of writing, and then I was like, oh my gosh, that's my premise. Like I was just writing facts, and for whatever reason, I decided I would start with the 2014 Crash. So the first graph that I have in this article will show kind of the dotted line of what was happening with the WWE stock between January and June of 2014. And what you see is in January of 2014, the stock is sitting around $16, and then it starts climbing and climbing. And by mid-March, it's above $30 a share. And what had happened during that time was essentially the WWE Network was launched, and the promises WWE had given from executives about, we are going to more than double our business. We think we could triple it. Look at all these numbers. How could we not do great? And what happens is on the WrestleMania 30 number is announced, and it's 667,287, and we see an enormous drop in their stock that one day that they do that. And I think that's something that revisionists will sometimes forget about, is how bad that was compared to what people thought it was going to be. People thought that WWE was going to come out of the gate and get 1 million domestic subscribers without a problem because they had a product that often could do 1 million buys on pay-per-view. They're offering it for 1/4 the price. They were offering it with, free trials and lots of hubbub. And instead, the stock fell a whole bunch that one day. It dropped 20% just on the announcement that no, they weren't as hot as they thought they were going to be. So then everyone put all their eggs into the basket of, all right, WWE is going to have this killer domestic deal, and that's going to be huge. And so on May 15th, they announced their NBCU deal. They did it after hours. And instead of coming in at more than double, like Vince had promised, they came in at about 1.5 for their NBC renewal, which means they dropped 40% day over day to the next morning. And that stock went down to about $11. So in a stock that had started the year at about 16, shot up to 31 within 2 months, and then dropped down to 11. That was a crazy day for them. And they were forced then to say, okay, we'll hold an announcement, a call to talk about this. But they didn't hold that
conference call.
But they didn't hold it until that Monday, I think it was. So they still had a couple more days where it was pretty crazy. And then a couple days later, you can see basically in the chart I have here, it has little orange lines to show how much volume is being traded every day. And so you see the first big spike is when the WrestleMania number is announced. The second big spike is when the NBCU deal is announced and everyone starts, running in panic. And then the third spike, which is the second big line, is when they hold that conference call to basically say, here's what we can promise you about the future.
Yeah.
And so you see
a great day this would have been a great time to buy the stock because it's now, you would have more than doubled your money. Because that's what's
but more than doubling your money in 3 years on a single stock like this, I don't know if that's been worth it. There's a lot of other stocks that have doubled this year alone.
Oh yeah, yep.
So it's easy to catch a falling knife, right? And to pretend like you could have, to say, oh, I knew at $30 was the peak for WWE. Now at the time, I was a contrarian. I was out there telling people, I don't think WWE stock is worth $30. I think this is overpriced. I don't see this going well. I don't think they're going to do more than maybe 1.5 times their old deal. Joe Lanza, of all people, pointed out that I wrote an article one time where I said, I think WWE will do about 700,000, for their first quarter number will they'll end. And that's pretty much right on point where they ended in the end of March that year. And so I wouldn't say it was hard to predict some of this stuff, but what happened was there was overconfidence in the possible transition speed and the market size, overconfidence in the idea that people would move away from their legacy pay-per-view business so quickly and go to an over-the-top streaming service, and they understood what that was. And there's an overconfidence in WWE's ability to negotiate domestic rights TV deal. And just because they had loyal viewership. And just like the charts you were showing, their viewership was diminishing kind of year over year. 2014 was really what I'd say was an inflection point for them in terms of really seeing their ratings begin to really crumble, for sure. And it was clear that this was now a longer trend line and not just kind of an aberration of 1 year. So I said there's some learnings that they can make from this deal. You can and in the article here, I just kind of say there's three things you can learn from this. Number one is you should announce early and disrupt less, because they were announcing in May of 2014 for a deal that began in like October of 2014, I think it was. So they gave themselves less than 6 months kind of changeover time, even though they didn't change partners. It was less than 6 months away. Number two, disrupt less. Adding WWE Network was very disruptive. People at NBCU were not thrilled with this. People were surprised by the launch of WWE Network, which always shocked me because, a lot of us saw it coming. But for whatever reason, a lot of these big MVODs, multi-video on demand, MVPDs, provider distributors, they did not understand that this was coming. And they were very annoyed because some people signed TV deals with WWE with the intention of getting pay-per-view money. And then WWE immediately came up with a service that undercut them. And so that was the reason why they couldn't launch in the UK. They couldn't launch in India. They couldn't launch in Germany. They couldn't launch in Japan, because they had signed deals with people and they basically were undercutting them because they were no longer splitting the revenue with them, but rather they were trying to take all that revenue themselves. So announcing earlier and disrupting less, well, there's not much disruption left to had, right? Because we're at the point now where in WWE's world, there's basically only they have the network. The only thing they can add on is tiers. I don't think the tiers are going to disrupt the Raw world anything, unless the tier includes live viewing of Raw or SmackDown, which I don't think it will.
Yeah, which is not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, unless they go into a revenue sharing mode with NBCU, which would be about the only way they could announce that, is that they would basically say, we're gonna renew with NBCU, and as part of our renewal deal, we've already signed a change to our digital rights platform, and we can do a tiering. That'd be about the only way I could imagine them ever offering something like that would be that phenomenal.
But if live programming, if live programming is the glue that's holding the bundle together, what piece of programming like that does the USA Network have other than WWE? So, you know what I mean? Like my thought is, why would the USA Network ever agree to that? Because that is the entire value of WWE to them, isn't it? It's certainly not the ad rates. It's that this thing does good ratings and it's live programming, and it helps us be able to sell the USA Network to the MVPDs, right? So why would
the USA Network is a member
that?
of NBCU, which is an MVPD. MVPD is basically the media conglomerate. Yes, no, you're right. There's I would say it's the evolution of being a media conglomerate, where you start to say, I'm not a television network, I'm a media conglomerate. And whether my content is distributed online or on television, I'm agnostic. And so if you can come up with a way to make it valuable to me online, then I can say I'm still boosting my profits overall, which is why I say WWE would have to do revenue sharing with them on subscription model, almost equity share, if you will. And then that goes more towards that model that says, hey, someday WWE is going to become owned by one of these big media conglomerates. And basically we're selling equity now in the company and starting that partnership so that down the line we can do the transition so that you would own WWE. And again, that's a very far-fetched model. I don't think that's happening, but it could happen.
And that would be the with especially the impressions I've gotten from Vince McMahon in other conference calls where they've asked him if there was any interest in selling WWE, and just he brought up, I don't know how much control you would lose. And just the things that we know about Vince McMahon over the years is that he wants to be in control of this thing, and I don't see him in his lifetime parting with. He might sell some more stock, but I don't see him parting with total control.
So the first part there was just basically they're out of ways to disrupt NBCU. So at this point, what they're selling is pretty clear. They're selling this TV show that's worth this much with this many eyeballs on this hours of programming. And they've finished the WWE Network rollout. So they're out of TV partners that are going to be surprised by the fact that they're trying to muscle in and do network stuff, right? So the next person who subscribes in India or pays to buy the rights in India knows what they're getting in terms of the bundle with WWE Network. So I think it's underplayed in terms of people understanding just how annoyed some of these TV companies were by WWE launching the network and basically cannibalizing the money that Sky thought they were going to make, or that the Indian Sony 10 Sports thought they were going to make.
Because those deals included pay-per-views.
Yes, and that's why traditional pay-per-view was still offered in many of these places, and WWE was undercutting them. And that's also why WWE Network didn't launch in some of these countries for so long, is because there was strains between the TV network and them. And they also realized that the amount of incremental revenue they got from launching in, say, Germany was probably a lot less than the TV rights fees they were getting from their German provider.
Yeah.
So there's that. And so I basically just make the point that there's very little left for them to do except for to tier. And their tiering is more about that basis of saying sometimes we offer more and the people that will spend more, get more, want it. And so I think they're going to offer a tiering system that's going to involve much more of an e-commerce platform. So you can get tickets in advance. You might, get some voting options. Maybe you'll have access to more territory library. And for the small group of percentage of people that care about that stuff, you can charge them more for that access. So it's just like, Ring of Honor or something else where they, charge premium for the ability to get kind of first in line.
Yeah.
And that's the big movement in retail this year has been, charge more for the ability to get in line. We saw that with Taylor Swift's launch.
So I think within probably by the end of 2018, we'll see a tier that includes stuff other than WWE, ICW in progress, perhaps. And I think in 2018, we're going to see, just based on what we know about how the UFC TV rights negotiations are going, I think we're going to see an increase in fees between at least WWE and NBCU.
So if you can scroll down in the article just a little bit to where I have the chart about the TV rights.
Mm-hmm. This one?
I think so. Just taking a second for it to catch up. No, I'm sorry. Keep going down. So this is just saying that they're going to announce early for these. Right here. So here we have TV rights year over year. showing how much money they're making. So it starts in 2010 at 127, then goes to 132, 141, 163, 176. Then you see a logarithmic change, not logarithmic, but a large step change in 2015 to 231, 2016 at 241, so about $10 million more. And then I only have the 9-month number here through 2017. You can see it's 195, but you can already see that 9 months of 2017 is worth more than all of 2014 could do. And it's worth 1.5 times what 2010 did. So, I mean, we have increased our revenue on TV rights quite a lot. And at the same time, what we see is Raw's ratings on average on a coverage rating basis has dropped from 2010 to 2017. I use WWE's own numbers from their annual report for this. And then at the same time, SmackDown's numbers have basically been flat on a coverage basis. And that's also reflecting the fact that SmackDown's actually improved from both the brand split, from going live, from moving to a stronger network and moving nights. So all of those things have happened to basically keep SmackDown somewhat flat over that time. There are some decreases downwards, but I would say if anything, the last 3 years here, we've seen almost a small increase on SmackDown, but there's so many other variables that have changed. Whereas Raw, for the most part, with the exception of the fact in 2012, it moved to a 3-hour format permanently, has been flat to down for years and years. So the point in this part of the article was just trying to talk about they need to get cozy with NBCU, and they need to figure out what their WWE Network strategy is going to be. Because as I show in the graph right below this, the WWE Network has basically reached its natural ceiling.
And that is sort of the basis of your thesis, isn't it? That it's not so important what it's important, but it's not as important what WWE's relationship is with its fan base. It's more important what WWE's relationship is with its TV partners.
Yeah, WWE cares a lot more about whether NBCU is annoyed by Jinder Mahal as champion than if their fans are.
Yes.
That's the basic truth. Can you scroll down maybe 2 more page downs and see what the keep going one more? There it is. The WWE Network revenue to paid subs number.
Oh, this. Yeah.
Just, what you see when you look at this is just the subs number is really beginning to get flat. It started getting pretty flat in 2016 Q2 all the way through 2017 Q3. It's not growing very much. And the revenue has improved, but the revenue is also beginning to flatten out a little bit. And this is natural because we're at now a point here where there's almost no new markets for them to use for artificial growth. And the only marketplaces they have left, we didn't see by adding twice as many pay-per-views that we saw twice as many subs, or even 1.5 many subs. So we're also seeing that, they have to kind of control their spending in order for them to make this more profitable. And so if anything, the profitability gains that they're getting for WWE Network overall are coming from either growing internationally in these few marketplaces where they charge a different price that's a higher price, or more likely from where they're just cutting costs year over year. And they're just spending less on programming overall so that they can call, 1.6 million subscribers is worth a lot more to them than 1.5 million might have been, or even 1.61 million might have been a year ago.
Yeah, I think we're reaching the saturation point for the network, at least until they create some bigger stars and get some people more over than they are. And the way to increase revenue is to tier this thing.
And then the very last section of the article was just basically trying to explain that WWE has really moved to try to strengthen their balance sheet. And so part number 3 here was just saying, strengthen your balance sheet. And it looked at a talking point that I stole from the Motley Fool. And it's one that you'll hear Dave Meltzer talk about incessantly, which is this idea of free cash flow. And then how much do they spend on dividends? And it's just important to note that WWE spends about $36 million a year on dividends, of which about half goes to Vince McMahon. It used to be a lot more than half. But I think with Linda McMahon kind of selling some of her shares, it might be down.
It's like 46%. He owns 46% of the stock, 80 some odd percent of the voting power.
Yeah, so it's about half goes to a member of the McMahon family of the Class B holders, and then the Class A holders is everybody else, but the Class B holders have 10 times the voting rights. So
I think last year, dividends for Vince calculate out to like $17 million, something like that.
Yeah, I think it might have even been higher, like 20, but when I looked at an article you had done on it, but I looked at the latest number to see what the number of Class B shares outstanding were, and I noticed they were down. I think it's because Linda sold a bunch when she went into the government from a year ago. But the point being $36 million in dividends, and they only generate oftentimes, free cash flow in the $30 million range. So a lot of years they're not even covering their dividend with their free cash flow when you take their net cash minus their purchases of other property, equipment, and other assets. And it just says a lot about the fact that WWE used to give much higher dividends from 08 to 2010 when they were kind of in that stagnation period. They were spending $80 million a year on dividends, which is intriguing when you also think about the fact that their net profit was actually probably, at least net income was higher during those years than even it is now in some funny measures. But they dropped their dividend rate a lot, which also didn't help their stock kind of going into that 2011 through 2014 period. What they've done that's important is that $200 million they got in convertible notes. And
just real quick, if you're curious about what the ownership is in terms of the stock ownership, and this is not voting power, that's different, but the number of shares that are held, Vince McMahon has 46. This is as of last year, but Vince McMahon has 46%. Stephanie has 2.5%. Linda on her own has 0.7%, although I think they hold some shares together or something. I'm not sure what the succession would be, but yeah, some executives hold tiny pieces, and then there's these large institutional groups that hold full percents. So.
Perfect. So that's a great example there. So you're absolutely right that it's about 46% Vince, maybe a little less than half. So about half that dividend goes to him. So when they were doing $80 million a year, more than half that dividend was going to Vince. So when Vince says, "Hey, I'm giving up my," he used to always say that he was foregoing his salary for a couple of years there as a performer when he had $1 million a year contract. Then people would sometimes forget is that he was still getting $30 to $40 million in dividends every year. So he was well paid.
This is the article that I did for Fightful on this is when the proxy statement came out, and you find out what the executives make. So Vince McMahon's paying himself about $3 million a year. And again, that doesn't count his dividends, which I think I reference in here somewhere.
17.5, you said right below there.
$17.7 million in dividends in 2016. So, okay.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And so what WWE did is they went out to the marketplace. They said, "We'd like to borrow $200 million. People gave them $200 million. They took that, they made it cash. And this was for the purposes of really strengthening their balance sheet and making themselves a little bit more attractive to some of these people. And what I also would think they're doing is that they're betting against their future TV deal. Is now they have $200 million of cash that they can spend now on whatever. So they don't have to feel like, oh, someone's going to hold me hostage for a TV deal. I have a little bit of leeway. And what's interesting with that is that there's, I don't remember it's called a strike price or not, but basically there's an implied thing in this that says you're going to give me $200 million, but this is convertible. You can turn them into shares of stock. And specifically what you can do is you can turn them into shares of stock if the price of the stock goes over $24.91. Now, technically, I think they could turn them into shares of stock at any time, but it wouldn't be worth their while until it goes above $24.91, because that's essentially the equivalent of I gave you $1,000 and I'll give you 4 shares or 40 shares. And so it's about a $25 price is what you're implying by saying, if you loan me $1,000, I'll give you 40 shares of this. And what's valuable is to say, if the stock is above $25, it's worthwhile for a holder of this convertible note to consider converting into stock, because essentially they're going to get a share of stock that is valued at more than $25, but they basically only paid $25 for it, is what has happened. And for the first time in 3.5 years, WWE stock is above $25 on the basis of their Q3 earnings. And so that is really remarkable, because it basically says this is the first time that it would be valuable for people to start converting that stock. Now, if you think this stock is going to skyrocket the way it did a few years ago in the lead up to the domestic rights, you'll probably hold on to it until it gets above $30. But at $30, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these convertible note holders switching out of WWE, a loan basically they made to them and take it as stock rather than having it as the dollar value. So
could that affect the stock price?
I mean, obviously it'd be people buying. I think what is actually happening right now is they take out these things called warrants, and it's a very complex financial instrument where they basically do something so that it won't affect the stock price directly from the people converting, because they basically are already holding those shares kind of in, if I understand it correctly, they're kind of holding them in escrow so that they have those shares ready to give out. So you're not actually diluting the pool. Now, do I think if the stock goes over 30, we're going to see some big action on trading? Absolutely. Because I think a ton of people that hold shares today are going to either want to get rid of it or get into it at that point.
Because that's a target price for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you can go back to that 2014 chart and look a little bit about what was happening. when the stock was shooting up to $30 and what was what the volume trading looked like. But basically the volume trading on WWE for the most part is driven by news. And so this news cycle around when the new domestic data is going to come out about what the new TV deal is going to be huge. They say they're going to let us know between May and September of 2018. That's great that they're going to give themselves more than a year balance before they'll have to trade off. But it's tough in the sense that if it's not NBCU, what happens in that interim year as that relationship between them? And then at the same time, if you set yourself a deadline and you can't meet that deadline, does that really hurt your stock? And that's kind of what happened to WWE in this last cycle is they kept telling us they could get it done and then they would delay on when they would announce. Mm-hmm. So that was my entire thoughts on WWE. We've done a really good, nice little podcast here. That's a video podcast. I've tried to enunciate a couple of these numbers that we saw on the screens. I think this is a really fun thing that I hope people do check out on YouTube and they look at to see what's happening with WWE stock and some other things. Brandon, why don't you get your plugs in? Where can people see you? What can they do?
People can read my work at Fightful.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Thurston, BrandonThurston. Maybe I'll be writing something soon about what we sort of discussed just now about WWE popularity and Google Trends and things like that. Oh, your screen's working again. Talk, say something.
Yeah. Have I been just a face this whole time for you?
Well, yeah, we've been sharing the screen the entire time.
Yeah,
so
I turned off my camera for a little while because I sensed it was problems with connectivity. So I figured give more bandwidth, and now my camera's working again. So yeah, people can find me. I don't know if I'm on the screen or not, but people can find me.
You are.
Awesome. At Mookigana on Twitter. Check out our Wrestlenomics Radio YouTube page. Of course, check out all the great articles and content that's up at voicesofwrestling.com. I already got a tweet myself or a Facebook message myself from my friend Wells all about Chris Jericho. So, I think this Chris Jericho thing is hooking the casual fans that are interested in Japanese wrestling, but are not interested in Japanese wrestlers. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean in the way that they care about understanding Kenny Omegas of the world. And that, for whatever reason, seems to be their hook in. And I'm seeing more and more evidence that, this Jericho move, I think this is really strong.
English speaker and coming from the same culture, that's what connects people more strongly on a wider basis.
Absolutely. So I hope to maybe write another article at Seeking Alpha, checking out maybe something about just the international domestic split and just how different some of these metrics look and what the revenue engine for WWE, 88% of their growth this year has come from domestic, North America and Canada, US and Canada. So I just think that there's a lot to be said about as much as we talk about India and gender and everything else, it really comes down to making sure the US marketplace is happy.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye.